Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us again on the podcast. Today, I am talking to Sandy Cooper. I am so excited to be talking with her. She is a writer, podcaster, Bible study teacher, and professionally certified home chef. That's pretty awesome. I cannot cook. She has been a wife to John for over 28 years and is mom to Noah, who's deceased, Rebekah, 23, Elijah, 20, and Elliana, 15. She's been encouraging women since 2008 at the scooponbalance.com and podcasts weekly at the Balanced MomCast. Love that name. From her home office in Florida, where she lives with her family. So thank you so much for joining me today, Sandy.
Oh, it is my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited. So Sandy has a new book and it just came out called Mom, You're Amazing. And she sent me this digital copy, and y'all, like, her writing is so great. Like, I just love the way you write, because I just looked at it and I was like, I can't stop, but I gotta stop, because I was just trying to look over it really quick. And right from the get-go, I was like in tears over your story, but I was also in tears over feeling like it just gave a voice to a lot of the things that we struggle with as moms, and things that we think, but we don't know how to say, or maybe don't want to say or admit. So it just gave me a lot of comfort, I think, to hear it from, a more experienced mom too, that it's not just me being a first time. I only have one child. He's 6. So that was also encouraging, and God was just already stirring in my spirit about the season I'm in now and the things I'm struggling with. And the way you have the book outlined, I could kind of ping pong based on what I thought, the season I was in or what I thought might apply. And it was just speaking words of encouragement. So I am just going to go ahead and recommend this book to you guys. I'll put links for it in the show notes and stuff, but it is really, I just can't wait to read the rest of it. So
yay.
So I want to start out by talking about what led you to write this book.
Yes. Well, thank you for asking. And I just want to say, first of all, in response to what you just said, as an author, I think the highest compliment that I could ever wish to have is when someone says, I started reading your book and I couldn't put it down and I was crying. Like, that to me is like, that was like, when you were saying that, I was like, oh, like, because you can't force that. And that's how I like to feel when I read books as well. So the fact that I was able to produce that in another person is awesome. Also,
you don't know, not your family.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. I don't even think my family reads my stuff. So, there's that, but I will also say that the age, you said you had a 6-year-old, 6-year-olds are my absolute favorite. And that I am not even kidding. Like, I think 6-year-olds are the absolute cutest, best age ever. And I've enjoyed my kids at every age, some more than others, but the 6 is amazing. Okay. You asked about, why I wrote the book. Is that what was the question? I just wanted to talk about what you said.
No, that's fine. What led you to write the book? Yeah.
Yeah. So back in 2008, we adopted Elliana, and I had been writing already. Like, I was submitting things for like magazines and stuff like that. And it had been writing, just for little publications and things. And I was teaching a Bible study in my home at the time to a group of women. And so we were getting ready to adopt the baby. And I realized that I had at that point, Elliana was 1 when we adopted her from Guatemala. And I had then a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old also. And Elliana was this 25-pound baby who couldn't walk yet and had never been put down, I don't think, a moment in her life. Like, her foster mom carried her everywhere, let Elliana sleep on her. And so when I got her, that's all she wanted. And toddler adoption sort of requires that you do that so that, the baby bonds with you. Okay. So I had this Bible study in my house. I couldn't figure out how to take care of my family and also shower and tried to wipe the pee off the toilet seats and, things that you'd want to do if someone was coming over for a Bible study. So I decided that I would start a blog. Blogs were kind of new at the time. And I just started like this free blog, and I called it God Speaks Today because I was teaching on hearing God's voice in my house. And I thought, oh, I'll just make this like a teaching blog. And then the ladies that were coming can just read this. And so I was blogging about all of that. And then, then occasionally I would find myself like wanting to write about what the kids were doing, or like something I was going through, or, a struggle I was having, or writing about, post a recipe, or, whatever. I just started posting all the things all the time. And so eventually I rebranded the blog and changed it to the name, The Scoop on Balance, which is what it is now, so that I could just continue to write about whatever I wanted. And about a year and a half ago, I was looking back in the archives of my blog, and I realized I had like somewhere between 700 and 800 essays that I had written. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of going back into the like oldest ones and rereading and forgotten what I had written. And I wrote them in the trenches of motherhood, and while like in the midst of having these struggles and writing about what God was doing in my life and the things I was learning. And I just thought, wow, I can see the stats on the back end to see that like no one has accessed these blog posts in a decade. And I thought, I just feel like these would be, not all of them, some of them were horrible. So I'm not even saying like they were terrible writing and like not good content. But there were a few that I thought I would really love people to see these again. And so I sorted them by theme and decided that I would publish them into books. And so the first one is the theme of motherhood, and it is called Mom, You're Amazing, and Other Things I Want to Tell You. And it's a series of essays written to moms. And most of the things that I wrote in there were things that I was obviously experiencing at the time in real time. And I found that in my stages of motherhood that I needed constant encouragement, because the enemy was always saying to me that I stunk as a mom, that I was failing, that I wasn't doing something right. And I needed always a pep talk. So one of the things I did on a regular basis is encourage moms in that way, because I thought if I need to hear this, other moms probably do too. Mm-hmm. And so that became sort of, I saw that there was just this theme that I wrote to moms all the time, which is how that became the title. So that's how that book came to be.
I love that story of that, because it's not, I mean, you could have sat down to just write a book, but it's almost like you had what started out as an outlet for sharing. Because I'm the same way. Like I'm like, I just want to talk about, like, I just started homeschooling my son.
I heard that. I actually listened to your podcast and I was like, oh, wow, she's homeschooling. And you have like, don't you have like some crazy degree? Like you're
like a PhD in cancer biology. Yeah.
That is insane. Yeah.
Well, I homeschool him. And so I'm just like, I want to share, like, I'm the kind of person that as I'm learning, I do the same thing. I want to like give the knowledge to someone else and share and encourage, or whatever God's teaching me right now. I'm like, I just want to tell somebody. And so I wanted, that's why I started the podcast or started a blog. But so I think that that's, an encouraging thing, because for some women who are listening, they keep trying to find out the thing they're supposed to blog about or do a podcast about. And maybe it's just a way for you to share, and you just never know where it's going to lead. So, like you said, you ended up rebranding, and it really did kind of focus on motherhood because that's what you were interested in. And you do teach about hearing God's voice, but that's just like a part of what you're doing. And it became like this resource / this like archive for your own self to go back. But to be able to pull that back out, I just think I think that's really fun. And it's cool that that you did it. I guess that you thought about putting it into a book in that way, because the way it's written, people will see when they get the book, but it's like, it's written like it's happening because it was happening. And it's like, you're sharing about it, and it's like you're sitting down to talk over coffee, but you're simultaneously encouraging and like telling this fun story. And then like something about, God and faith is in there. It's like, it's just a neat way to put it in there. And it's just, it's encouraging almost without, you do say blatantly encouraging things, but sometimes it's like, it's just woven into the story of it all. So I just think that's really, really fun.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I love the part that you said, you feel like you're sitting down having a cup of coffee with me, which is precisely why there's a cup of coffee on the front of the book. And that's exactly what I want. Like, when I write, that is exactly what I'm picturing. I'm thinking, okay, if someone was sitting here right now and we were just talking, what would I say to her?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I would say. And I just, from an author, from a reader standpoint, that's how I want people to write to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that has come through. So thank you for telling me that, because that is very affirming to me as well.
Yeah. And just to think about this, my mind goes into this way, because I think about the people listening too, and even myself. One of the hardest things that I've found is writing. So,
Mm-hmm.
I have all this science, dry academic writing. And so trying to write in a way that brings out your personality or can have that effect is challenging. So I think that, like you said, having that, that like imagery for yourself, like, okay, we're sitting down, like, what would I say? That's a good start. But it also, like, I don't know you, but I felt like instantly reading your story that it immediately creates this, like this know, like, and trust factor that we hear about in online business, where it's
exactly.
like you can hear that in blog posts and things. So even if you don't have an audience, if somebody can read something, they are already kind of like hooked in, because they're like, yes, she gets me. I get like this is conversational. It doesn't always have to be so like stiff on our writing when we're doing blog posts and editing it to death and all of that, like typos. I mean, obviously not a ton, but if they're there, like, you're a human, like you're,
exactly.
it doesn't have to be grammatically correct all the time. So I just wanted to, I guess, put that out there too.
Oh yeah. Well, and I appreciate
well, I just think it's encouraging for people, because they will not start a podcast. They will not start writing a blog because they're just so worried about how they sound or whatever. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit. So in the book, let's talk about the book a little bit. So in the book, you talk about lies that moms believe, and let's talk about what those lies are and where they're coming from, who's lying to us, all of that stuff. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I found that was like a really big thing. When I mean, it still is, I shouldn't even say was, but especially when I had, when especially just through those, like, in the trenches parenting years. My kids are a little older now, so I'm kind of launching them, and it's a little different now, but I realized that I believed a lot of things that were not true. And it caused me, it really tripped me up. And then I realized it's not just me, it's all the moms. And I do have a spiritual enemy who hates me. And it's important to understand where those thoughts, when you start hearing those things in your head, where they're coming from. So who is lying to us? The first thing is that we need to understand we have a spiritual enemy. And because he hates Jesus, if you are a follower of Christ, he's going to hate you too. You're his child, you're filled with his spirit. And so he automatically hates you too. And the Bible says in Ephesians 6:12, he says, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but it is against rulers, against authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And so one of the things the enemy will always try to do is deflect and be like, your kids are the problem, or your husband's the problem, or your friend is the problem, or your mom is the problem, or your job is the problem, like anything besides him. But we need to understand our battle is against him. He's the one lying to us. And the Bible calls him a lot of names. He calls him the Bible calls him the slanderer, the deceiver, the tempter, the enemy, the evil one, the accuser. But Jesus called him a liar and the father of lies. And when he speaks lies, he is speaking his native tongue. That is what, there's no truth in him. And so that once we realize that, then we can start dealing with what is going on with those lies in our heads.
Yeah. And I think that for some women, I know for me, we just sort of like forget or don't think about that there's an enemy. Like we hear about the devil, like we know this, but we don't really walk with that. I've been a Christian my whole life. And last year, I guess, I was talking to a friend and she was telling me about the book, The Bait of Satan. And I was telling her about something I was struggling with, and she was like, the enemy wants you. And I was like, the what? And like when she talked about it, I had a bunch of emotions. Like one, I felt like there was this invisible side of like the world that I just like didn't know about. Like it never really was a thing that I thought about. I thought about like, I'm the problem, I've got to fix me, which there is some of that, but
Sure.
it was like I wasn't thinking about lies coming in or being attacked. I wasn't thinking that way. And then the other side of it is that sometimes people think that's kind of like too spiritual or something, but it's real. Like if we, and that's what he wants, is for us to just dismiss and just not even take into account that he is working and doing all of these things. So I think that's important that you talk about that, because for a lot of us, we feel kind of weird, or we don't know how to handle, like, what does that even look like? What does that mean?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, in terms of like, so the question, like, how do we handle it? Or like, what are the,
like, I guess, I mean, it's, let's just go there. Like, how do we handle when we are feeling, I guess maybe it's more starting with, how do we start to recognize what the enemy sounds like? Like, how do we recognize that voice that we don't want to listen to?
That is such a good question, because so here's something that I have learned. So I mentioned at the beginning, and we talked about it a little bit, that when I first started my blog, I started it on hearing the voice of God. And that has just been that's been a topic that has interested me for, 25 years. Like it's just been something I've been I've wanted to understand it so much. And my second book is all about that. But one of the things that I learned that has really helped me with this is that, and this is, maybe you've heard this analogy before, but when bank tellers are trained to identify counterfeit bills, they are not trained to look at every single counterfeit and say, okay, now this is a counterfeit because of this, and this is a counterfeit because of this, because technology is constantly getting better. The bills, the counterfeits get more and more clever and harder to detect. And so the way that they're trained is they are trained to recognize the authentic bill. And so it is that way, no matter what comes across, they can look and say, well, it's not this, this is the real thing. Once I know the real thing inside and out, it doesn't matter what comes across my desk. If it doesn't look like the real thing, then it's not going to be authentic. So with understanding what the enemy's lies sound like, the best way to recognize it is to get to know God. And get to know what God sounds like. And the best way to do that is to familiarize yourself with his word. And so, because he sounds exactly like his word. Now, it gets tricky because the enemy will sometimes use the word of God in his lies. And so then it's like, like, can I ever figure this out? So like, actually you can figure it out, because with knowledge of the word, and then also having a growing relationship with God, like the Holy Spirit will lead you. And so you don't need to be afraid of it. And that's one thing that, it says in the Bible that we are not, I like the way the King James Version says it, we're not ignorant of his devices. So we know the Bible has told us about the enemy's schemes. And there's another scripture that says that he walks around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. So we know that he's walking around looking for us at a vulnerable time. And we know that we can know what he sounds like. We don't have to be ignorant, but it says to be alert because he walks around. The Bible never says to be scared. Like we're not supposed to be scared of this. So we don't have to be afraid. And I know it's a little frightening when people start talking about the spirit world, because it does sound scary that there's like evil spirits out there trying to destroy me. Like, well, yeah, actually there is, but we don't need to be afraid, because God has given us everything we need. So the best way to know what he sounds like is to understand what God sounds like first, and then look at examples in the word where Satan did this, where his lies, where they talk about what his lies sound like. And also I believe that, just from a very practical standpoint, surrounding yourself with other mature Christian women, especially, if you're a woman listening and you are a mom and you're an entrepreneur, like find the older version of that and someone who is mature in the faith. And when you are in doubt, say, I'm hearing this voice that says this, I'm hearing this thing in my head, I'm feeling this way. Does that sound like God to you? Or does that, because he will try to sound like God.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things he does is he takes things like you even said at the beginning, you said, well, I was feeling this way and that way, and there was some truth to that. That's exactly how he operates. He'll take something that is an element of truth, and then he'll twist it just enough to make you feel afraid, to make you feel guilty or shamed, to make you feel prideful, distant from God. He basically only has like 3 major things that he does. So he has like 3 major temptations, but he'll make it very specific to you because he's been studying you your whole life. He's been studying me my whole life. And so he knows exactly how to push our buttons. But the 3 things that he does is he will try to get the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life. So the lust of the eyes, he'll get you to look at something and want it and just be like, you know what, if I had that, then I would be happy. If I had that house, if I had that husband, if I had, that situation, that business scenario, that computer program, that whatever, it can be anything. If I had that thing, then I would be fully satisfied. The lust of the flesh, if I could feel that way, if I could just feel more appreciated by my husband, if I could just feel more appreciated by my kids, if I could just feel more affirmed by my clients, if I could, whatever, lust of the flesh, pride of life. If I could just be, I could just be this, if I could be that, 7-figure entrepreneur, if I could be that mom who doesn't freak out on her kids, if I could just be, so he's only got those 3 things, but he'll tailor it so specific to you. And so, yes, it's kind of learning what pushes your buttons and recognizing when you're in a vulnerable state. So, the whole hungry, angry, lonely, tired, the HALT acronym, but also, when are you overwhelmed? When are you stressed? When are you too busy? When are you hurried? When are you afraid? When are you in pain? He's walking around waiting for one of those situations so that he can come and speak lies to you in that moment. So it's a process, but I don't want anyone to walk away feeling like, oh my gosh, that's so much. Like we can get there. Like it's, yeah.
I love that explanation. That was really good. And I've never heard, I don't know if I've heard the bank teller one, but that's really good too, because that's what I've come to learn myself, is that to overcome any of the negative things that were kind of getting in my way, that were holding me back, that whatever, it's like I had to learn like what God says about me. And I talk about that on the podcast a lot, because as I learn, as I read, you can just, it just becomes so clear, or more, it's always changing, but like you'll learn more and more. And so then, like you said, to recognize when you have these negative thoughts coming in, even like stress or anything coming in, it's like, why am I stressed? Because I think I need to do it all by myself, or because I'm not trusting God to provide, or whatever that looks like. And we're constantly in this battle, like you said. And so I think that's so important. And a lot of times it's Christians, especially moms, busy doing business, all this, we like leave church to Sunday, like Bible reading time with God to Sunday. And maybe that's about it. Or, if we don't have a quiet time or whatever. I know it was probably about 2 years ago that I was like, what's this quiet time people are talking about? And so they were like, I was like, oh, like you're reading your Bible every day. And I remember sitting down and telling myself, like, I'm going to read it. But when I opened it, I was like, a bunch of words on the page. Like I just didn't understand. So I went on this journey of learning how to read the Bible. And I mean, now I love that. But it is really important. It's an important part. And the enemy will try to get us to think that we don't have time for that. We don't have time to sit there and spend time with God. And at some point I remember telling myself, like, if I am saying to myself, I don't have time to spend time with God because I have, house stuff, or I have mom stuff, or I have business stuff, is he going to bless those things if I won't even like give him the time? Like I need to get myself situated, because that's the most important thing, so that all the other things are able to, do better.
Right. Yeah, no, that's good. I totally agree. Like, and I think it was great that you recognized that was the enemy coming in and telling you that. Like he knew that's exactly where he could get you.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I'm not the enemy, but I would venture to say that he was behind you feeling confused when you opened up the Bible for the first time to sit down because you were interested in diving deeply into it. And he thought, well, we need to take care of this because
right now.
Yes.
Don't
he's
let
the
that
author
happen.
of confusion. Yeah.
Mhm.
So when you feel confused, like whenever I feel confused, and I remember it was my best friend said that to me years ago. I remember calling her and I was so confused about something. And I'm like, and I kept saying, I'm so confused. I don't know if God's telling me to do this or God's telling me to do that. And I remember her just stopping me and she just was like, okay, well, you keep saying you're confused. So I know that's not God. And I was like, oh, wow. Like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even realize that, and that's when it's so good to understand that the scriptures say God's not the author of confusion, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. He's not the author of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. So when you feel afraid, when you feel confused, like you can know, okay, and that's the benefit of getting to know the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Because, a lot of people quote that, like, you'll know the truth and the truth will make you free. Like even people who aren't Christians, who aren't familiar with scripture, but actually in context, it says that you will obey my word. Oh, let me see what exactly I have that written down, because it's the quote is actually not just you'll know the truth. It's hold on, I want to say that one exactly because it's really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. That was Jesus saying, if you hold to my teaching. And so it's not just like knowing, quote, truth. It's the truth of scripture. It's the teaching of God. It's like, that's where we are free. That's where the freedom comes.
I love that. It's so good.
Yeah.
So, well, I love that conversation, but I also wanted to dive in a little bit because, like I said, I was kind of looking through the book, and some of this will come back up, I'm sure. But one of the chapters that stood out to me was, I think it's chapter 9, where you talked about, and wanting to do more for God than just be a mom. Yeah. And that really stood out to me because that just, it just hit my heart. So can you summarize that chapter for us a little bit and tell us what you were saying there?
Oh, wow. Can remind me what the title of that chapter is?
I guess I can remember. It's like, because you have the whole book. So it's basically, it was just saying that like when you had your kids, you were always kind of looking out, wishing that you could do something else, wishing you could have ministry, that kind of stuff, wanting to do something else.
Okay. Yeah. So, and that was always the pull that I felt. I felt like so I have always wanted to be a mom. Like I was the one who I literally played with baby dolls. Like that was my toy of choice. And I played with baby dolls till I was probably 13 years old. Like I still to this day cannot hold a baby doll unless I'm holding it in proper baby like way. Yeah. Like I would never be able to just grab a baby doll like by the arm or by
like
the
a toy.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like I can't treat it like that. Like I scoop it up and I hold its head and so I still to this day do that. So I was this person who always wanted to be the mom. And when I became a mom and I quit my job, I was working full time at the time. I was an insurance adjuster at State Farm and got pregnant, had Noah and quit. And planned on that being my life. And as soon as I got home, I loved taking care of my babies. Like that was never even a question, but I always felt this pull that like, I mean, I knew that I could write. I really loved to teach. I felt like I wanted to, like, I felt like I was supposed to lead something, like, and it was just this constant um angst inside, because taking care of kids requires so much of us.
Mhm.
And I didn't even know if I had it in me to try to split that
Mhm.
up. And yeah, and I felt like God had given me all of these desires. Like I really wanted to not just work, but I wanted to like change the world. Like I know that sounds really grandiose, but that was like the honest to God truth.
Mhm. I'm the
Like
same way. Mhm.
yeah, and I wanted to, very much like what you said, not just learn things, but I wanted to be like a conduit to, like, if I
Mhm.
learn something, I feel responsible to pass it on and teach it and represent it. And um but yeah, I felt like my children were so all consuming that I didn't even know if that was possible. And like God had given me these competing goals. Like, it was like he gave me these kids and then he gave me all these desires and talents, and I almost felt like for a period of time, I wasn't even allowed to use some of them, and it was very, very frustrating. So, I remember, I think that the, chapter that you're talking about is, like, when I remember talking to my husband, and just where he talked about all the interruptions in his
Mhm.
day, and I just felt, my husband's a hospital executive, and at the time he was like just working his way up the corporate ladder, and not at the top of anything at that point.
Mhm.
And I remember him just telling me about meeting after meeting and interruption after interruption, and I just said to him, like, wow, it must be really hard to do your job with all those interruptions, because that's how I felt. Like I just felt like, oh my gosh, the kids are interrupting me all day. And he said, he goes, no, the interruptions are my job. Like that's why I'm there. Like that's my job. And I had I heard him, but I was thinking about me, and I was
Yeah.
like, right, right.
Right. Yeah.
Like, and so it wasn't really competing. And what's so funny is, now I'm on the other side of it. And here I have this book, and I have like 3 books, all that, I'm like just really frustrated at home behind my computer, like haven't showered in 2 days and my house is trashed, but I'm like plunking out these, stupid blog posts that nobody's reading, and just feeling like, well, I'm just going to do this. And God's like, yes, yes, do that.
Right.
Yeah, and you're just be obedient to me today, and then just just watch what I do. Like then it'll all come together. Don't worry. So yes.
That it just stood out to me so much because when I first started working from home, so I was in this career, and a lot of the women that listen are career women who are
Yep.
either considering switching or have already come home.
Mhm.
But they're struggling just like, I mean, I did with that transition, because a lot of times we put our value, our identity, all of that stuff in our career. And so
Sure.
when we come home, for me, it was like this culture, like I wanted to be home with my son, but I would never flat out say, I just want to be a stay-at-home mom, because like you
Right.
said, I had all these things, like I can do all these
Mhm.
things. I want to like teach and lead and all of that. And so it was like, I had to go through that process of realizing that I don't have to be doing some special job to be important, but
Right.
still, like I was doing the whole thing where I thought my son was interrupting, and he was in my mind. I was like oblivious. I thought that I was going to come home. He was like 2.5 at the time. So this is just silly now, but I would thought that he was going to just sit beside of me and play quietly for the 8 hours while I worked. And he was going to
Right.
play with Play-Doh, and I had all these things. And that is not the case. He has ADHD. I have ADHD. So it was chaos, like the hardest thing I've ever done, harder than grad school. I was
Oh
in
my
tears all the
gosh.
time. I was yelling at him. He's 2. And I'm like, I'm terrible. I'm yelling, just this crazy time.
Yes, yes.
And I remember I was so stressed all the time and crying, which ultimately that season led me like back to God, because I kind of been out of church for like 10 years. And so
Mm,
it led me back, because I was like, what am I doing? And
yes.
as I was standing there one day and I was pray talking to God, I'm just like, why, just like asking questions. And it was sort of like this epiphany moment where I realized, like, if my job were mom, then playing in the floor with blocks isn't like an interruption. That's my job.
Right.
And I was like, cleaning is my job, and going outside with him for a little, that's my job. And I was like, and so just like this realization that I had more than one calling, that it was like, I could have a business and a thing, but also being comfortable with whatever that looked like, how small or big God wanted it to be. And then what it looked like to manage my home and take care of my son, like all of those things, and really owning that as just as important and valuable as like working to make money. And that was a huge, I mean, it wasn't like instant and everything was great, but it was a journey from there, still going, where I have to catch myself not being, especially homeschooling now, because he's always here, but it's not an interruption. So putting on the different hats and seeing it as, this is my mom job and this is my, whatever job. That's what really spoke to me about that one.
Yeah, no. And that's so good. And, too, realizing that sometimes there's balance is kind of more like a pendulum than it is like scales. And that really it's okay to kind of like swing to an extreme and be like, okay, for this short season when my child needs me a lot, it's okay to like let these other things go so I can be all in with that. And then when my child gets to be, a little more whatever, if we're going through an easier season, or I can arrange, some childcare, or some, I can coordinate something with my spouse or whatever, then maybe it can swing back over and then you can like go all in on that other thing that you want to do. And I know one of the things that used to drive me insane is that other people who recognized like gifts and talents in me would say, oh, God is really preparing you for big ministry someday. And I'd have these little kids at home. And so it made me feel like, oh, this is little insignificant, unimportant ministry, even though I love being a mom. Like, just kind of reconciling all of that, just realizing like, just like you said, like it is 100% okay to recognize motherhood as a legitimate work calling, vocation, like whatever you want to call it. And also carry with that God has given us, like, that's not the be all end all. That's not, I mean, maybe some women don't agree with this. So I'm going to say it anyway. I know a lot of women who believe that motherhood is the highest calling a woman can have. I don't believe that, because what about all those women who can't have kids? Does that mean that they can't fulfill the highest calling that God has for us? Like, no, like if you're a mom, yes, I believe if you're a mom for a season, those kids should be your absolute top priority here on this earth. But that's not all God made you to do. Like, because when you that's idolatry. If you just wrap your whole life into those kids and that's your full identity, and that whatever you put in that place, whether it be your work or your role as mom, nothing should be in that place but God. Like that's God's place. You get all your identity from him and all your affirmation from him. And then you just obey what he tells you to do through the seasons of life. Just do what he's telling you to do. And I can tell you right now that if you have little kids at home, that should be a huge part of what you're doing right now, because you're the only mom that they're going to get, and you get one shot.
Yeah.
So yeah, you don't get a do-over. You don't get to, and if that means you lose some opportunities that are coming your way now, that's it. But I'm not saying that everyone who pursues work, sometimes that's exactly what God is calling you to do. But he is also, if he's doing that, I guarantee you, he's simultaneously showing you how to provide for those kids, because there's no way he's going to call you away, split your affections in that way, call you to pursue something and where you're constantly putting your kids in their most vulnerable and formidable state in the hands of someone who isn't capable of rearing them the way God would have them reared. So yeah, there's my little rant.
No, I think it's good. But I mean, the reason I want to talk about it is because I feel like I went through this where there's just so many different opinions about what motherhood's supposed to look like. And kind of where I landed was that it just depends on what God's calling you to do and what that motherhood looks like, whether it's full-time stay-at-home mom, whether it's home and working, whether it's work, like out in the workforce, like any of that, and just being okay with whatever that is and not trying to do what you think you're supposed to do. Because when I first came home, I tried to, not when I first, at some point in that timeline, probably like a year in, I tried to deny the whole business side of it. I tried to say, well, I just can't, I swung, like you said, the pendulum, but in a kind of a bad way. I was like, I swung the other way saying I'm like terrible for wanting to work or wanting to do something extra. So I'm just going to be mom. But when I did that, I felt, well, A, I was really grumpy, but B, I also just, I didn't like that. So I don't think that's what God was calling me to do. So I wanted to ask a little bit before we go on to the next part of how you balanced. I mean, you said you like work or at least had an outlet, something that you could do, whether it was business or not. And maybe, I don't know if you eventually switched that on and you're just thinking, I'm just going to do the slow but steady, or if you really were just having an outlet to put it online, but what that looked like for the being okay waiting while recognizing that you had these desires and these skills.
That I don't know that I really reconciled that until probably 2 or 3 years ago, honestly. I would say that I looked for every opportunity that I could during those years to work on the things, to hone my skills, to educate myself about the industry that I was interested in. For me, that's writing, going to writers' conferences when I could, taking small speaking engagements when I was invited, if it worked out for, my family at the time, trying to like lead whatever, if I just saw an opportunity to lead something as small as like, a class, a Wednesday night class at church where I could just, this will give me an opportunity to teach this thing that is burning in my heart right now. And I just have this 6-week Wednesday night opportunity to go do that. Well, I found that those things accumulating over the course of, 20 years ended up becoming the books I eventually wrote. Like the first book I wrote, I taught the introduction of that book's so funny because it's just me starting out feeling like I have no idea what balance is. I'm so unbalanced. I suck. I was going to say suck. I'm sorry. And I would just start studying, and then I would like invite a couple women over, and I'm like, let's look at this together. Like, let's see if we can figure this balance thing out. And then, then teaching it to a small group of women, and then like changing the curriculum up. And then we moved, and then I'm like, go to that pastor and be like, hey, I have this class. I kind of like to teach it. And what do you think of this? And then like again and again and again. And I just kept like tweaking it and teaching it. So like, I felt like I wanted to be a mom. I always it's so funny because looking back, I was never really just a full-time mom. I was, but because I quit my official job, I never saw myself as a working mom, even though I was never okay if I wasn't doing something else. If I'm like not, I'm going to lead the nursery and preschool department, and I'm there just like everyone else, like on staff. But because I have my babies, I don't call myself a working mom. Like what? Like it was bizarre. Like I didn't even know what to call myself. I wouldn't have even called myself a working mom at the time. But looking back, I absolutely worked the entire time. Like,
yeah, I love that story though, because what I love about that is that I'm sure there were ups and downs on emotions, but it's not like you prioritize being mom, like that was there and you were good with that, like to the point where you even wouldn't really admit that you were doing something else. But you didn't deny the things, like you said, when opportunities came across your desk, you would say like, ooh, I want to do that, or I want to write here, or I want to learn to write, like whatever, like you knew where God was calling you, ultimately the thing you put on your heart in addition to being a mom, which obviously ended up wrapping into it. But like, you knew that was there. So you just didn't leave it to get dusty, to say, well, in that next season, well, when they're gone, I'll start, because God was still putting it on your heart to do it now. And I love that, because sometimes we, like you're saying, the season we're in might be to be heavy on the home and taking care of our kids. And the part about, this is kind of season I'm in now, the part about business and all of that isn't as prominent. I'm not striving for it. And if I don't see it for what it is, right, seeing it that God has me in this season where I'm homeschooling, taking care of my home, taking care of my son, all of that stuff, that's the dominant thing, then I would be aggravated. Like, no, I'm pulling and trying to go over here and do this business that I wanted all along. And it's that submitting to what God's asking us to do, but still like creeping along. Like we're doing this podcast interview because I'm like, I love talking to people. Yeah. And so like, fitting that in and doing little things to improve along the way. And you're honing, the skill that God's given you. Like you said, it's just such a cool story to see how it all came. Like ultimately looking back on it, you can totally see how God's working, but like in the middle of it, you're like, what are you doing?
I didn't see it at all. I was so frustrated. I didn't see it at all when I was in the middle of it. In fact, when I first started my blog, and we talked about this, it was like 2008, and blogs were just about to hit their peak. Like they hit they really crescendoed around 2010. And then all these people that started their blogs around the same time I did, and they were all like, the blog community was very interactive. Like we all read each other's blogs. We all commented on each other's blogs. And then if we would end up like at the same writers conference, then we would all sit at the same table and we would see each other. And so it's like this super tight community. It was just really cool. And then what happened is all these women who were in the exact same life stage as me, they either realized they couldn't do it and they just fizzled out completely and their blogs just, stopped, or they like shot up and got book deals and, arena speakers, and like, which was at the time, like that was like the be all end all. Like if I could get a book deal and be an arena speaker, and I had like these little kids at home and they were doing it. And so I'd be like, well, okay. So what ended up happening was, you said such a key thing is you have to do what God is telling you to do. Like you have to be obedient to what the Lord is telling you to do. Every time I would start kicking tires on that road, I could feel the Spirit of God in me saying, nope, not now. That is not what you're doing right now. That, teach a little class for, a couple of weeks at church. Yes. Write on your blog. Yes. Go to that writers conference, that once a year thing where you're only gone for 2 nights. Sure. But you are not going to catapult up this circuit where you're traveling and and so what I said no to that whole thing. And I was angry because I could feel like that thing inside of me where like, I'm like, why not? Like, like just
stomping your feet. Like,
yes. Like why I can do this. I can do it. And what I ended up, this is actually like really sad in retrospect, although it worked out okay for them. But a lot of those women who were my peers like shot up that trajectory. And then almost all of them ended up writing a book with some kind of theme of, I shot up this trajectory and now here's what I learned. And I'm not doing that busy, crazy life anymore. Now I'm going to be present with my kids. I'm not going to be busy and I'm not going to be. And I remember when those books started coming out and I thought, oh, see, that would have been me. That would have been me, like just crashing and burning and then writing like this whole memoir about, I wish I would have just stayed home and not tried so hard.
Yeah. There's so many women who do that. And and like sometimes it was the thing they were supposed to do for whatever reason. I don't know.
Of course, right.
Them. I don't know. Exactly. But it just depends. And so I think that was a really important thing to touch on. And I'm wondering how you ended up transitioning to really, because your kids, I know 2 of them are older, but like you still have a high schooler. So when did you start transitioning to say, okay, I want to like now I can do this as a thing?
Yes. And there was a definite time. And this was really cool because I could totally feel the hand of God on the whole thing, because I had just put it aside. And not only for my kids, but I do have to say, I mentioned briefly that my husband, was climbing up the corporate ladder. Much of what I was saying no to was largely because he was working so many hours that I didn't have the ability to rely on him to even be home in the evenings most of the time. It was me. It was me taking care of these kids. I didn't live close to family. I didn't have like grandma who could pick them up from carpool or watch them on the weekends. Like I didn't have any of that. So, and that's why, and I just want to make this point before I move on, is that everybody's situation is unique, and it's very important to pay attention to, the criteria that's in your life. Because if you have grandma who is just dying to get her hands on that baby, then, you might have a lot more freedom than I had. Or if you have a work from home husband who is present and is flexible, you might have a whole different opportunity for time than I had. I did not have that, like, period, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. I just didn't have it. Okay. So I had continually I would do the little tiny snippets of things and then get really frustrated. And two of my kids have very special needs. One of them is on the autism spectrum, and one of them is dealt with depression and anxiety the whole time she was growing up. So it required so much of me. Much like when you talk about your son having ADHD and you're having to pull him home and homeschool him. Okay. So I can totally relate to that type of thing. So there came a time when my daughter was a senior, and then my son was a freshman, and my younger daughter, whatever, was 5 years younger than that. I can't do math. Sometime where she was just okay. Like, I'm not wiping bottoms anymore. I'm not. It's just a different season. And the opportunity, I was offered the role of being women's ministry leader at our church on staff. And everything about that, like all the internal, like, this is it. I mean, this is the right next thing for me. Like, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. All the God feelings, all the like, yes,
green light.
Yes. Green lights. And because of that, like, a whole bunch of other things happened because I said yes to that. And that kind of was the turning point, because everyone in my family independently came to me and said, like, and I could just cry. Like, you and I did not prepare these questions, so this is all like off the cuff, but they all came to me independently and said, Mom, you have like given all of your time for me. And this is what I've seen you do for me. And now we want you to do this. Like
that's such a gift for them to give you that. Okay. I mean, even though
they all did. Every one of them, like even the youngest one was like, yay, mommy, I'm so proud of you. Like it was such a different scenario than when they were little. And I was always feeling like, you're like peeling kids off of you when you're leaving to go to the thing. And they're like, no, Mom, don't go. And
my son does
like,
that.
Yes.
Don't leave me, Mom.
Exactly. Or, you can see it on your husband's face. Like, what time are you going to be back? And like,
it's been 30 minutes. Where are you?
Right. Yeah. Okay. None of that was happening anymore. And it was
free. Yeah.
I felt free. I felt like, obviously I'm still home. Like, I've got to go pick up my daughter in a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, I'm still being mom, but it was 100% different. And, where I knew that they were fully invested in me doing all the things that they knew I could do, that I had been like sitting on, but not really sitting on.
I was going to say all those little things, those little classes that you would have, you got offered this because you were in the church the whole, like,
yes, I was doing that the whole time. Right.
Yeah.
I was there
so
for
like,
16 years, like
right.
just
So
serving in every way I could. Right.
Right. So this moment wouldn't have happened had you not been still kind of tapping in and listening to God on all those little things. And I just think it's just fun to look back and see how God is preparing us for those seasons, and to have your perspective now to look back and in the moment, like you said, you were frustrated. It was, why can't I? And all of that. But now you can see the beauty in it and how it was perfect for what you needed to be doing and where you're going next and all of that. I mean,
yes. And I will say the gift in that too is just, I now have these beautiful, deep relationships with my kids because I was present. And I wasn't always, and I'm not saying it's never God's will for a mom to be away from her kids. Like, please hear me. I know you've got to like, you need a break, you need to, and sometimes God is calling you away for a season. And, if he's gifted you and you're out there, saving lives somewhere, like by all means, like go save your lives. Like, I get it. Like, don't, but for me, I knew that he was calling me to be present in the home primarily. And now I am reaping the benefits, that I see the fruit of that, because my kids, I have no regrets. It's not like I'm looking back over their childhoods thinking, gosh, I missed everything. Like, I missed nothing. I literally missed nothing. Sometimes I wanted to miss a lot of things. I'm like, oh my God, do I have to be the one to go again?
Another ball game.
That's right. Exactly. And it gets like that when you're but on the other side of it, when they're all coming to you and texting you and talking to you, and you can see you have a genuine, loving relationship with your young adult children and your 15-year-old, and you're their favorite person.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It really
That's like every
does.
mom's goal.
It is every mom's goal. It was my goal too, but I didn't know how to get there because, not all the years are, when you read my book, I don't know if you got to part 3 yet, but part 3 is like, those middle school and teen years are like brutal. And, I didn't know if any of them were going to even like me, much less like have me be their favorite. But yeah, I mean, not to like throw my husband under the bus, because he's amazing. But all the kids will tell you, Dad, if you ever leave Mom, I just want you to know we're going with her. They all joke about it. Like, they're all just like, yeah, she's way better, which it's so funny. He laughs too. So like, obviously we're not going anywhere. We've been married 28 years. So we're good. But yeah, it really is worth it. I mean, just, when Jesus was asked, like, what's the greatest commandment? He said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. This is the first and greatest commandment. And on these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. And I have built my whole mothering journey based on that scripture, because I know that if I put God first and I love my people well, everything else falls into place. And that is what I tell moms all the time. I'm like, you get those 2 things right, and it's going to look different because you are not me, and your family's not my family. Your kids are not my kids. Your husband's not my husband. You might not even have a husband at home. Like, whatever your situation is, if you get the God thing right and you just make it your commitment to love your people, whatever that means, then everything else falls into place. Even if you don't see it at first, even when you're in the trenches and you don't understand how it's all going to play out, it all works out.
I love that, because I think as you were saying that, I was thinking that the difference there is, as we're going along and all those little decisions about should we or should we not and all that, like you said, it's loving God. And we can, when we think we want to do a business or whatever, it's like, are we thinking about what I want, or are we asking what God wants us to do? And then, like you said, loving our kids and serving them as their mom and holding that role. I hate that we ran out of time because I had more things, but just, I guess, really quick, one of the things that, and you kind of alluded to it, was like this, you said you're reaping the fruit now. That's what you talked about, sowing and how the things that you're sowing in whatever season you're in are going to come later, but it's hard in that season of sowing. And that analogy has been something that God has spoken to me so many times about business, because in particular, and just, I guess, kind of motherhood and business and all of that, because Nothing happens fast, no matter how much we want it to happen quickly. And it's
so
like,
true.
if you leave, like the thing that God tells me is like, if you're sowing and you're taking care of this field to reap the fruit, to have the harvest, whatever, to be able to experience that, you can't just like abandon ship. You have to keep working and you have to keep doing, and all the while, like you're doing the work, but you're trusting that God's going to like be on the other side, and then accepting whatever he brings or doesn't bring on the other end of that. So I just think that was another part of that. So this has been like an amazing conversation, and we could talk forever, I'm sure, about all the things.
I know.
Where can people connect with you and learn more about your work and your book and all of that?
Yes. Well, the best place to connect with me is on my website. That's kind of the hub for everything. It is thescooponbalance.com. And I also podcast weekly at the Balanced MomCast. And I've been doing that for 3 years, and I will not be showing up. I usually drop an episode literally today as we're recording, but because of all talking to everyone else about the book and being on everyone else's podcast, I didn't even get to record my own this week, but normally that's a good place to connect with me as well. And I am no longer on social media.
I saw that.
I'll tell you, if you ever want to talk about that off or on,
come back on and talk about that.
That's right. I love talking about jumping ship off social media because it's been one of the most exhilarating, scary, and fun things I've ever done.
That's awesome.
I feel completely free. So don't look for me there.
That's awesome. I love it. Because a lot of people think that social media is like needed for this online business, and I'm like, I don't think so. Pretty sure you just
there's other ways to do it.
Race thing, like trying to do the latest thing. That's just my opinion. But well, thank you so much, Sandy, for being on the podcast today. It was such a joy talking to you.
Well, thank you. This was like one of the most fun conversations I have had. So thank you. It was really great.
Good.